I'll, I'll go ahead and jump in. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Pierre DeBois. I am the founder of Zimana Analytics. That's Zimana. I've been an independent analytics practitioner now for 16 years, which makes me feel super old. As you can see, I'm bald, so that way I don't have to spend my time pulling my fro out if I ever have problems with metrics. Um, but I'm happy for you, first of all, for joining us this afternoon. I'm very proud to be able to do a presentation again for the Black Tides Data Group as part of Black Week in Data. And what we're going to do in this presentation, what we'll do is we're going to talk a little bit about it's designed to help you to kind of develop a little bit of a workflow with data. And the tough part about these presentations, I never know who or what experience base people are walking into. So I try to kind of keep it a little bit basic, but also kind of give you an idea of where to look for. And the idea behind this is to help you to understand basically upskilling. The idea that I know it may sound a little strange, like, data analytics, Pierre, people are always expecting us to upskill. But I think it's with AI, and I think with so many tools that are coming on, it becomes a little hard to organize. And I know I feel that, and I know that you certainly feel that as well too. So we're going to talk a lot, starting from some basics. I'm going to give some really basic tips that I think that will help you in organizing your work. And then also we're going to do a little something with LM Studio so you can kind of see how that works. I think that's important if you're starting to deal with AI models. And then we'll talk a little bit, have a larger picture of how you should be organizing along the way. And these are just little things I think that will help you more than anything else. Um, but let's talk a little bit about why this is happening. I know that, like I said at the beginning, upskilling is has always been sort of part of the work at some level, at least it feels like it. When I started in 2009, I was focused on Google Analytics, and I still do that for my small business clients. But I have a lot of clients who deal with R, more and more who are dealing with Python, and more who are dealing with larger data sets. And there's now a plethora of ways, which is a big deal because that's a big word, to be able to work with data and craft data models. And that's forcing everybody to do all this sort of upskilling. This was a comment just from the World Economic Forum. It's from a report that they did called The Future of Jobs. It appeared in Tech Target, where they found that in the report that 77% of the employers who they had surveyed and interviewed for the report plan to upskill their workforce, with another 47%, while 47% responded they intend to reskill employees in AI affected roles. And so there's kind of two things in here, is that the majority already understand that they can't sit still with the same skill set because a lot of times things change. And on top of that, with AI, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about AI taking root, would take our jobs and that sort of thing. There's a lot of opportunities right now to kind of work AI in our workflow more than anything else, and we probably are on the spear's tip to do so. So we need to think of our upskilling goal basically as a way of pairing some hands-on learning when we deal with our data, and deal with contextualized strategy. And this second part is the most important piece of it. I think with AI, it's the benefits that we get from it is more when there's a context to it. And we're seeing more and more tools that are allowing us to place context around our prompts when we prompt. So starting off with something very simple, we can go into trying to figure, as we get our context together, we can start kind of picking more advanced tools along the way. So what we want to do is organize our topics, basically. What is it that is our purpose for our data that we use? And then I think that one of the critical things we need to start thinking about is managing our time, because we have so many ways of accessing data, so many ways of accessing tools, that our time, it can feel like we're wheel spinning a little bit. Was just a phrase I use. It's just, if you imagine your car tires spinning and blowing smoke, that just means that they're spinning before they get that traction to move you forward. So, and that's, and to be honest with you, I think that's okay to a point, but we have to learn how to kind of get going. So we have a lot of little traps we have to avoid when we try to upskill. Pointless doing is kind of an awkward phrase of sorts, but it's kind of just means that there's a lot of tasks that we get thrown at, and some of them just may not be a value add for what we're doing. It may be too nuanced if you are looking at Monte Carlo Markov chains, for example, but you don't really use that necessarily in the models that you're using. Or it could be types of data that you just, or type of data cleaning that may not be that might have you spending time on data that really isn't that important. Um, Being distracted while when learning, I think is a bigger deal now. And here's what I mean by this. Obviously, in the picture, you have a wonderful young lady who is clearly focused and what have you. But in real life, a lot of times people are distracted by a lot of things, like very small things, ranging from errands that you have to do, and it cuts into your time a little bit. So you have to figure out how to get those time blocks to really review things and take it in. Um, Being too distracted and maybe dealing with too many pointless doing tasks can lead to like this being too surface level when you get a idea that you want to pursue. I can tell you off the bat, it probably took me a while to understand model context protocol and its value, but eventually I had to dig in to kind of get past the terminology. And that's what you should be doing. You should try to, sometimes you might know what something is, but you may not understand why or what its role is relative to your system or project. So that part is becoming much more important as we more options. And then the last bit is just, we are learning. Sometimes we may be learning the tech, but not necessarily the skills. And sometimes that just means that, again, we might be stuck on one or two features, but we may not be necessarily getting this full picture of, why certain things are important. So that part we have to, these are traps that can happen along the way. So what you want to do, and I'm going to use the basketball reference here, is that you want your upskilling or your learning to be the pass that you plan to make. Now I'm sure that everyone remembers in basketball that we have what's called a pivot foot, as no as no not no check is showing. Everyone has a pivot foot that they pivot on, basically. That point where you got to get a pass going, and you have that one foot that's free. So the idea with this is we have to think of our pivot foot, as being the information or the skills that you have. And these are things that you want, these are things that give you a foundation for building onto something else. Um, that's always a great part, this place to start, even if you're not even sure, what is a regression. You still you can still start with some things and then try to develop what your step foot is. And step foot I had to look this up actually. It's the technical term for that foot that is free to move about, and you're trying to figure out which direction you want to go. Um, your pivot foot to me, honestly, in this day and age, really should be your familiarity with the data. And here's why I say this. A lot of times when you're trying to understand functions, you're trying to understand statistic models. R programming is notorious for white papers. Everyone who's done with R has accounted some sort of white paper in their lifetime, I'm pretty sure. Um, it can be a little bit overwhelming. I had actually a couple of students who were PhDs, and I had to kind of figure out how to show them how to show them some things with stats as well as some of the syntax. Because in a couple of cases they had neither. So if you can imagine being introduced to R, it can be a little intimidating. But what you want to do when you're learning anything is establish that pivot foot. What is it that you do know, basically, or what is that certain? Data is probably the easiest way to do that. So for example, here, I have just a simple time series object. And in this object, I'm just taking, I have it's supposed to be a time series with a couple of columns, one for temperature, humidity, and pressure. So if I'm doing something for weather and I'm just trying to learn get a feel for what a time series object is, then I can use my data to help guide me. I use that to understand the observations and the columns formed. It can help you for understanding the object class, basically. And then again, your data is the familiarity you have with your data becomes your kind of your pivot foot. It's kind of because it can help you to understand what things you should be expecting from a function and whatnot. Um, Now I won't go through this too deeply. I'll make the slides available, by the way, if anyone wants the slides. But on these two slides, I have a set of one slide is a set of the Python, and one is a set of R. Um, and a lot of these are ones that you're familiar with, but I would say you want to start working with um, uh, functions where they help you either with data manipulation or visualization, and keep it really pretty simple and tight. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Many times people are coming up with packages and extensions of packages that can feel like a never-ending story. And when you're learning something, you don't want to just keep, it's yes, your instructor will say, yes, I want you to keep learning, but you want to create some sort of structure. Okay, you want to, like I said, you want to develop that step foot. So some of these are very straightforward. Like for example, on data manipulation, if you've dealt with Python, you've seen pandas and you probably have seen NumPy. Polars are starting to get really, really more and more popular. And DuckDB is also starting to get very, very popular. So that's kind of in there as well. Visualizations, you'll see a lot with Matplotlib, Seaborn, Plotly, Altair. And Altair is one I've seen a couple times. I've really haven't used it very frequently. But the point is that you developing some familiarity with these functions and packages. You want to do it just to be familiar to what they are, what they can do. But I would not try to commit to like a deep. I need to memorize every function, everything, because each one has a lot of functions and there's a lot of different steps, and that could be a lot of I'll show you later on when we get to the later slides. There's things that you could do to kind of create a library of these, not only of your own, that will help you have a quick ready reference. And this is what helped me throughout the years, to be honest with you. Most times I've used R. I've been pretty much an R user now for about 10 of the 16 years. And to be honest with you, a lot of times, and R has a lot of packages. Right now, as it stands, there's at least, if I check the count, it was something close to 23,000. Used to be 17,000. No person is going to ever ask you to remember the deep functions, but having some familiarity with some of the functions can help you. Okay. So we've gone from data to functions, and some of these, I won't go through these very deeply, but some of these are, again, very similar. Dippler, tidier, for visualization, ggplot. There's a huge library around ggplot. Shiny, this is more of an app more than anything else. You can see here, I don't know if I can show my cursor, but you can see in there that there's, when you pull that library is called, there's an actual function where you have the user interface, that's what the UI is, and a server. That's become much more popular as people have come up with apps and host them online. And then you have, again, for machine learning, Carrot is really popular. Has a library of functions for everything ranging from regressions to decision trees and so forth, and a lot of nuanced ones. I can't remember the whole count, but I know it's past. I think it's like close to 120, if I remember correctly. So let me get into this. So let's say that you've dealt with your data and you dealt with your functions a little bit. Okay. So one old school thing that's helped me when I'm starting to play around with these functions is I still write. I know this sounds a little old school, but I'm going to stand by it. I've all 10 toes. I'm going to explain why my 10 toes are there. Thank you, Sia. Love it. Writing is still, I think, still important. And I'll be honest with you, this is something I had to also learn to adjust, because I usually tend to write for everything until I start realizing, I'm like, Pierre, you're not in college anymore. But the writing part is still useful initially, because what you want to do is get a little bit more familiarity. And what writing does is that as you're looking at documentation, for your packages, that writing it's a slower process than just typing. So what you want to do is get a sense of what the functions are and what they do. And I actually come up with a little bit of a technique. I actually, if you go to, I'm going to hold this up so you can see this. And this is my secret, Energel, Staples. So yeah, thank you. But what I do is I keep a 3-color setup. One that gives me an explanation on, what a function is. This one that you're seeing here is a new package that just got introduced 2 days ago. It's called weights, and it gives a variety of functions for producing simple weights, basically, if you have a model. It gives you some chance to do some things with a coefficient. But what I did here is I had black for my explanation. I used blue to put together a syntax based off of what's described in the document. Every package has a document. And then I have in there just a kind of like a purple that kind of just, has a couple of notes again from the document explaining what it is. And then the green that you see at the bottom is just an example. And the idea with this is I go through this exercise. I don't try to go through I don't try to go through white papers deeply, but what I try to do is try to hit highlights on functions that help me to understand what this is for. And it kind of helps me a little bit, not only for projects that are planned, but also I get a lot of times people are asking me to do writings and even presentations. So having to do that, you have to kind of go through this a little bit to get an idea of what's there. And so handwriting can help you just initially for just getting that deep encoding of new information. Um, Now, a lot of times, this is also another useful trick you can do is you can dictate, and dictation is now part of your is also part of your smartphone. Just about every tool, whether it's for content, if it's something like Word, Google Docs, Evernote, which I'll get to in a second, even Art Studio, you can actually, if you have an Apple, you can click the globe and D buttons together, and you can dictate within our studio. So the reason that this is helpful to you is that writing can helps you for shorthand. But let's say that you need to write a report, or if you need to kind of put something together, maybe for an article. A lot of times I get stuck. So what I do is I spend time dictating out exactly something from my notes, and then things are in my head. And that helps me not only to when you speak, you have to gather the information to be able to communicate it properly. So having some dictation and going through that can be helpful initially at the beginning. Okay. And let me know if I'm not going a little bit too fast here. Um, let's talk a little bit about AI. I'm going to talk mostly about Claude. I'm a little bit of a Claude fan, but you can do this with Chat GPT, Gemini. A lot of people in the developer community, you're going to find they're stuck on Claude, and there's kind of a big reason. Its context window for processing is very, very popular. Um, and let me make sure. I can't, by the way, if I can't see the chat because I have my full screen on, so if I'm missing something,
I
please let me
got
know.
you. I just
Okay.
just said if anyone has questions, we can like
Okay. All right. And
have.
I'll make sure we'll get through this so we have some time. So Claude is very, very helpful. What AI can do for you is a lot of times if you're looking at a package or a document, if you notice, particularly for R, if you look at how how the documents are set up, um, there's a format, and then every function is alphabetical. And the first one that begins with the letter A is not always the function that's useful for you. It may even be a data set these days, the way people are doing it. So a lot of times you can use AI to help summarize. I'm going to put emphasis on the word summarize information quickly so you can kind of understand maybe what's in a package. You can make some decisions quickly if maybe it's not a Markov chain the way that you would like to have a Markov chain, or maybe something you may not be helpful. And you can also use it to get some sense of planning out code. And this is one example here I have where in the prompt on the left-hand side, I'm asking it to just create a bar chart based on a data set for a bank churn, and it gives me a set of code which looks great, but in true AI tradition, you still need to verify. One of the things that you gotta keep in mind when you use AI is that it's great for summary, but it can still throw some things in that might be wonky. If you even notice this code, for example, if you look at the line where it says churn to underscore clean, and there's like an arrow, and you see churn to, and then you see the pipe, it's the older pipe, basically. There was a time where I don't know if they've done any upgrades where they got into the newer pipe yet. I think I've seen the older pipe version, but a lot of times it may be referencing things online that still haven't been updated. It can still hallucinate. I had one time where it gave me the impression that it told me that two data sets were in ggplot2, which I knew, and ggplot2 and another library, which I knew was not correct because you can only have one data set in a package. So you have to be careful with this. It can give you some guidance for starting out, but you still need to vet it in RStudio. or positron or some IDE so you can kind of make sure that it's running correctly. So this means that as you're dealing with data and you're starting to deal with code, you need to think about projects and systems rather than just the coding. The coding is okay, but I think what's happening now is that we're seeing more and more options for things to be much more programmatic. There's finally libraries now for R, like Elmer, which is used for large language models. There's another one called Ragnar, which is really, very good. A lot of these there's more things now that are giving you options to work within the code, but then also connect with other things. And so we need to think about that as we go forward. So one of the things we're going to do, I'm going to break just for 2 seconds out of this. I'm going to show you local LM, running local LM through LM Studio. How many of you have heard of LM Studio? Has anyone heard of it before? Yes, no, a few? Okay. It's I wouldn't call it I'll say it's relatively new, but it's been around for a couple of years now. There was almost since the beginning. It's kind of like an IDE, but it has a really big exception. It's designed for locally running. It does two things. It runs local language models, and it also acts as a server, which means now you have a way of connecting R or Python or even your terminal and run it through LM Studio and maybe even connect to another device, basically. So that changes what queries you can do. Most queries you're doing at the browser for ChatGPT and Claude are for maybe for queries. And even though they have, this is a whole side subject. There's projects underneath those. There's still sometimes when you're doing programming, you might want to be able to see a little bit more of what's under the hood, and you may have a preference between models. So let me come out of this for a second. I'm going to stop screen share so you can see this a little bit more clearly. Hang on for just a second. I don't see my mouse. I'll come out of this for a second. Okay. I'm going to continue to share. Yes. Let me go to, I'm going to go to my, oh, actually, I got it here. Hang on. So I had to do my desktop. Actually, I do need to do my desktop. Hang on for a moment here. One more. Because I want you to see my art studio and desktop together. So this should be, here we go. Let's see, I should be able to do this. If not, hang on here. Okay. So I'm going to show a couple of things here. Let me minimize this just for a moment. I'm going to show you, this is our studio. So I'm going to show, there's basically 4 segments to this. There is, I'll get to this in a moment. There is a chat version of this, which actually this should come last, but this is okay. But there is basically a chat just like you would for ChatGPT, Claude. This is used when you've selected a model, okay? So this is kind of a way of kind of practicing and working with a model. Now, where do you get your models from? Most of the models are usually from let's see if I can show this. Here we go. I'll go to Discover. Your models are usually coming from Hugging Face, which is a huge repository. Kind of think of it as an AI version of GitHub. And there are different models that are here, okay, that you can download. You have some here for this DeepSeek, Magistral, Devistral, and so forth. The advantage with this, though, is that on this right-hand side, it will show you not only a model, but whether or not you can download it. So like right here, this is showing Magistral. This is about 12.4 gigabytes of a RAM that's required. I'm on 16. I have an older laptop. It's a 2020 M1. This is already calling out to be probably too large or too close to the limit, where if you're too close, it's going to perform slowly. That's a big deal if you're developing. However, let's see if I can find one here. See this one. Oh, this will work. So this one here is 5.4 mini. It's telling me that for download options, it's a 2 gigabytes, so we're safe. There's a README here that gives me a little bit more information. So that helps you all the time you hear about models where they are trained with maybe certain qualities that they emphasize, you'll read about that here, basically. And then you get to download. And then when you do, those models stay right here. So these models are the ones I've downloaded so far. There's a Llama 3.2. You'll see that perform in a second. stable code and so forth. You can download them here, and you can, and then when you do in developer mode right here is at the top is where you can select the model. You can select any of the models you've downloaded. In this case, I have the llama in here, and that's ready to, and that llama is ready to run. And you can always eject it here. Okay, so that's a good piece. Now, let me show you with something with RStudio here for a moment. So this was, I had to kind of do an audible here. But let me show you a little bit. This is an example I had to pull just to kind of show you what's out there. So a couple of things you can run. This is Elmer, which is a package that is designed to interact with a model. Um, Basically, you can use this to interact with LM Studio. There's a set URL here. I'll explain that in just a moment. And here's the model here. And then you can query that model just like you would if you were in front of an interface. But then when it comes back, you can use the data objects. Remember, I mentioned about objects at the beginning. That data gets stored as an object. So this example here, this was taken from our blogger. So I just kind of wanted to show you real quickly how this works. So let me clear this out for a moment so you can see. So yeah, how am I doing with time? Am I doing okay?
You're doing great.
Doing great? Okay, all right. So if I run this, let's run Elmer. Tidyverse is just to being tidy. Um, I'm going to set my URL. This comes from LM Studio. The LM Studio gives like sort of the standard URL, and then there's a couple of subdirectories. There's 4 of them in general. Each one has a slightly different payload than the other. And there's documents where it explains that basically a little bit better than I can. Then the next part is on top of that, you need to call out the model. So in this case, we have Llama 3.2 in my LM Studio. So I'm calling it here and putting it into an object. You don't quite have to do it this way, but it's kind of a nicety. That way you kind of have one spot where if you want to change models, you know where to do it in your script. And then you can now specify your prompt, and you can use your C function and text. This one is just basically outputting data as a numeric string. So it's not really fancy. This isn't going to be really a big prompt. This chat VLLM is basically a function coming from Elmer, which uses the URL. So this is using the URL that we had up here. It's using the model, which we referenced up here. And then the API key from LM Studio is not very complicated. It's LM Studio. I didn't make it, but that's what they did. So, so you call that. And then system prompt is the reference prompt here. So this is kind of combining all this into one function. So I run this. I'm going to run through this very quickly. This is kind of this is sort of like a data seed, basically a data frame, 100 regular kind of a normal distribution. And if we run this, I'm going to run this through. Send the prompt. This is actually cleaning up the DTA R normal is our original starting point. It's cleaning it up a little bit. Just that's a cleaning. But here's the big piece right here. So right here, actually, let me switch off here for 2 seconds. This has, let's see, it should show. Oh, it's taking time. So let me show you this real quickly. So as I'm doing this, these last 3, I don't know if you can see this right here. You see that there's a date here, June 16th, 2:34. This is happening in real time. So what's happening is we're working in R. It's going to the server LM Studio as a server. It's running through and running the model for us, and then it's coming out with the output. So the idea with this is that the shorthand for this is that what you can do is that you can create a script. You want to do sentiment analysis on text, you can do that and have it run through LM Studio based on a model of choice that you want to do. You can have it look for comments or pull comments from text, basically. You can do calculations with it basically. But the point of this is that it gives you a chance to run something that you would normally have gone to Chat GPT, and that output, let's go back to R, what you get is this. And you can kind of see here, this is a little wonky a little bit, but the point of this is that you get these, some of these elements here. Most times you'll get something in JSON, you'll get something like an ID. The object with the text, this part is probably the most important. This is basically the text from, we've asked for it to come out with these sort of numbers based on this normal distribution. And those numbers, this is truncated, but it's basically going into this finished object. So the point is that it puts things into a data object where you can then pull and use that for a calculation. Okay, that's kind of the gross overview. But so why am I going through this as part of this presentation? Well, a lot of times when we are trying to learn for something, for me, for example, I'm used to doing something through RStudio. I've never done something through LM Studio before, but this was for me was my step foot. My pivot foot was data I had within R, having some understanding of syntax, and then and my step foot is trying to figure out how this RStudio or any other tool fits within maybe my original tool for RStudio. Okay, and that's kind of the general framework you want to keep in mind. Okay, so let's go back to our slides now. Let's go back to slides. Okay.
As you're going back, thank you for that tie back. Personally, it was really helpful.
Oh, cool, cool. Thank you. I'm glad that was. It's a lot. Our LM Studio is pretty I wouldn't say it's elaborate, but it's I think it's a useful there's another tool called Olama. You'll hear those probably equally, just like you would if you hear RStudio and Positron, the other IDE. Olama is more command line than anything else, but I'm pretty sure there's probably somebody out there in the web that's probably come up with a user interface for it. Whereas LM Studio has those user interfaces, those four that you saw on the left-hand side. A lot of times it's helpful if you don't know the size of a model relative to your laptop. That's where I think the biggest value is. So that was another reason I wanted to learn that in particular. I think if you're a developer and or if you are a data scientist and you don't want to get too much in the developer realm, I think the LM Studio is a good fit. Olama is really useful, but that's also I think if you're comfortable with command line, you're going to be comfortable with that. So, but there's options. So and in fact, one more thing I'll say too is there's also an API for LM Studio that's also command line as well. I think that's a whole nother story. But let's get back to the slides. So let's say that you've looked at your data and now you kind of get your project going. There's little things you can do. Some of these things are going to be familiar, and other things will be ideas to keep in mind. So the one that's probably the most familiar is this one: adding comments in your code. Now you've probably heard this a million times, but the idea is that the comments should help you understand why you're making a choice. I tend to use it quite a bit if I have data from one particular package, but I know that I'm not using the package for other steps within R. So that's one thing I do. In this example here, you also see that there's a reference for why did you need to set the URL, maybe another reference for a model. It should be something simple in a process step that should help you to something very, very simple, a sentence, maybe two. If you need to do more than that, this is where things like Quattro, which is Markdown. I know that many of you have used R. You probably have heard this quite a bit because it's been around now for a couple of years. Or Colab, which is the Jupyter notebook, but done on the cloud through Google. Any of those, anything like that, you should use it if you feel like the explanation needs to be something a little bit more elaborate, something where a teammate is not quite as technical, and you need to have something that just explains a little bit more about, maybe a history of the data, for example. So that part you can use. And one of the neat things, like for Quattro, for example, is that you can have code in R in one chunk, code in Python in another chunk. And then let's say if you happen to have somebody who uses Julia who's on your team, you can have different chunks with different programs, but that doesn't affect the whole document. So that's one of the good things about it. But the point of this is that it should be readable for maybe for you or maybe for your team to pick up with. Now, um, two things I'm going to go through in these next two slides. Sometimes you may have more than just the code and maybe the actual document. You may have articles that you've read. Um, I go through articles quite a bit. People ask me to write on data analytics quite a bit. So there's two tools I recommend. One is a little bit older, Evernote. I know some people, and there may be some people like, ooh, I don't like Evernote. I don't know why people do that, but Evernote's been around for a minute, but I still find it very useful. Um, and there's others out there, Notion and everything else, but I'm going to explain the key takeaway from this is that it's the features that you want to look for. Evernote is useful for if you know you have a lot of articles, it saves you time from bookmarking it in your browser. That's what the original purpose was. When it launched, what people would do is bookmark in their browser, but you end up with this large stack so high that it's unrealistic that you're going to go back in it to find maybe an article and go back through it when you're ready. So Evernote, what it does is that it allows you to bookmark these things, but save it in an application that first of all syncs between your desktop, your mobile phone, or your cloud. And then on top of that, you can put it in books and stacks where you can find things much more easily. Currently right now, I have about 14,000 notes in my Evernote. That's from 16 years, so give or take. And a lot of it, sometimes there could be images, there could be articles I've saved, or I like how somebody wrote something. A lot of times there are also notes that I've put together in here as well. And I also do writing for CMS Wire for marketers who are not quite as technical. So I need notes that are available to me to help me on writing. This allows me to do this. Plus, you can also dictate your own notes in here. So I can use the dictation feature that makes it easier. But what you want to do is doesn't matter if it's Evernote, Notion, or anything else, you want something that saves you time by allowing you to scan through your information. Evernote's very good with PDFs. That's what stuck me with it for such a long time. And there's a consolidation feature where it can summarize not only the notes you have, but even the notebooks that you place in here. So you can summarize that information using an AI. That's something they've put in the last couple of years. Now, the other one is another one that you may be familiar with. This is Notebook LM. This is from Google. Oh, by the way, Evernote is free with a paid version of $9.95. Notebook LM is also free, and I think there's a I want to say I don't it's not I think there's a separate paid tier. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that they have a Google Gemini Plus where it's included. So you might want to look if you're interested in this, you may want to look at the tiering before signing up. But this one's also very useful, but it does some things a little differently. You can save articles, YouTube videos, links of all sorts. That's what you see in the left-hand column where it says sources. Chat is just like your Chat GPT and Gemini. You can ask questions about those sources. The benefit of this, and also to a certain extent Evernote, is that you now create this sandbox of information that you can kind of that you probably need to control if you're trying to deal with a lot of information, a lot of white papers, and if you need to kind of control the date in which information has been updated. That's important in our careers, because the last thing you want to do is rely on a library that's been deprecated, or for a white paper that probably has been superseded by something else. These two note-taking applications can help you save it in a sandbox, so that way you have an idea of what you're looking at. And then one quick feature for this, actually two quick features I'm going to mention on this that's really helpful. You can create a mind map of your information that you saved in your sources. Really good feature if you need a mind map and show how certain things are connected. And the thing that's been blowing everybody's mind is that you can create an audio file that actually can act as a podcast. And they have like two people that are literally having a dialogue based on the sources that you've put together in the sources column. So that could be helpful to you if you know that you're on the go and you need to kind of, hear something, some sort of audio. That can be helpful to you as well. Okay, but either one, you don't have to use both, but the point of this, have a system where you can have your notes ready to go. If you know you're doing a lot of development outside of the programming and project that you have together. Okay. Um, Real quick, sometimes when I'm looking at new functions, everything else, I try to find 3 data examples that I could play around with the function quite a bit. So for example, MT cars, I know people have seen that, forever and a day. It's a very old database built into R, showing the stats on cars going back to 1970. However, there is a GT cars, which is a little bit more modern, based in the GT GT package. And I can't think of the other two off the bat, but there have been a lot of databases in the last, particularly last several years, and a lot of it comes from people developing packages and then having example data in there. You can switch and swap that data in for other things in your library, in the functions that you're using, just to kind of get a feel for how a function is working and maybe even try different features. Many times when people are writing these documents, they do, for the most part, they do pretty well, but there's sort of these one-dimensional, they usually use empty cards, iris. Um, but there's libraries you can go to. Plus, on top of that, you can look at uh, uh, um, Kaggle and Data World, even, and import some sort of CSV file. So, but play around with it. Give yourself a couple of times to play around with functions just to get, again, familiar, not to memorize, but at least familiar with it so you kind of know what it's able to do. So sometimes that can be of help to you. Um, Now this is a little bit more academic, but I still think this is still helpful. This is I'm an adjunct with Trine. I just started with Champlain College. I really love teaching. I'm falling in love with it, and I'm noticing that universities are trying to use these rubrics more and more often. Now, rubrics are really designed to score how you're doing overall. But here's the kick. You just want the table. You don't necessarily have to score yourself if you don't want to. So if you want to give yourself an A on something that wasn't quite an A, I won't tell nobody. But but the point is that you want to have something that gives you a little bit of progress. And there's a lot of ways you can do this. You can have you can even treat it as a journal, frankly, and have a little table in and put that table in Evernote. You can have a table in Evernote. You can put it in a spreadsheet. You can put it on a Google Sheet, maybe attach that in Evernote, or have that Google Sheet as a link within Notebook LM, but have something that gives you a little bit of progress. Part of the reason why I think this is growing important because as adults, it's harder to learn outside of the university system. I know people love I know people talk about universities and the cost, but one of the things that I'm a little critical about sometimes on the criticism about education is that you need a framework to learn, and it's really hard to do this as an adult outside of a university framework. You have to kind of create that. That might mean going to a library, and it also means how you have notes to keep up with your progress. You just want something that gives you a little bit of time to kind of keep up with it and at least have some references where you can kind of go back to. And then lastly, I would say, if you have repositories, and this is the GitHub part, part of the story, saving a repository, this is something you could, is whether it's GitHub, again, Colab, or even if it's just, if you did something as a project within RStudio and you saved it on your own drive, that's fine. But you need something where you kind of get familiar about where your files are a little bit, and also just about, what capabilities are. Many of these things like GitHub and Colab have become more of a platform more than anything else. Like with Colab, for example, there's now a plugin with Gemini and they now have what's called a data assistant, where you can actually explore data much more quickly in here. And I know that for RStudio, there's a connection with GitHub Copilot. Those sort of AI tools can help speed up the work a little bit, particularly for exploratory data analysis. But they also can get you to be a little bit more familiar with a repository of choice, which should be happening for you. Again, you've had your pivot, now your step foot, part of your step foot is the environment in which you've built for yourself. Okay. So let's summarize real quickly. So again, if you're not sure where to start, your best place is with your data, because a lot of times there's going to be things in your data when you explore it that you know that you need to have, and that's going to dictate a lot in terms of the libraries and what you may be trying to model. Focus on core programming packages if you're relatively new to R, because a lot of these, there are people who've built families around this. There's a whole library of libraries for just ggplot alone. Um, there's a lot for Torch, a lot, and I think the other thing too for Python, there's a lot of discussion about UV as a, with the package manager as well too. So that's another one to check out. But be focused, focus on a few packages for a while if you're trying to make some sort of pivot. Um, now to craft your project is your step foot. Keep that in mind as you're crafting the things in terms of the libraries you use, the functions you use, and keep your project environment features in mind, basically. And then when you get done, store your projects in your repository. That's a big part of it. And use all these as points to get familiar. Whether you write, dictate, and again, having those notes stored someplace when you need them, and then go through them as well. Um, and I would say also too, if you feel time constraint, one little tip I've given people is that, again, give yourself a block of time, aim for 20%, treat yourself like I'm going to use a lot of cars. So I also worked at Ford as an engineer, but when I was an engineer, anything where that's an engineered product, there was always a dedicated advanced engineering team that was separate from the production area. They did that because that gave that team an allowance to learn, to fail from their mistakes and pick up from those mistakes away from a production environment. And usually that the golden rule is always like something like 20-25%, most 20. But I would say you aim for 20% of your time if you can, even if you do it as a chunks, that will at least help you get familiar along the way. And with that, that is my presentation. I'm going to stop share because I know we got a lot of people in the chat. I'm going to see if I can stop share. Give me one quick second here because I think this is not letting me see. Here we go. All right.
There's a
Okay.
lot of thank yous. Like I see people taking actions already, making the rubrics, downloading LM. What is the
Uh,
LM
Notebook
Studio?
LM Studio. You can
Yep.
download that for free. That then if you're trying to do for your notes, you can do Evernote or uh Evernote or Notebook LM. And I would say, if you're using Notion or something like that, I'm not saying don't use those, but definitely look at those features and ask yourself how well is it letting you search through those the search through documents or things that you're saving. I think that's important. Um, yeah, and I see same thing from Mary A. I want, yes, you can collab. There is a setting, your runtime, you can change that from Python to R. I think Julia's on there as well too. But if you go into settings and adjust your runtime, that's how you change it. It's a very simple switch. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to see if anybody has questions. Seeing questions. Okay, you can come off
Yeah, you,
you can come off a mic and ask questions. It's okay, it's safe.
yeah, I was just gonna say that. Also, while all of you are thinking of questions, I just want to plug this survey so you can tell us. I know I learned a lot, but what you have learned from this and how it is helpful.
Yeah.
So
Oh, and
just
Mary asked a really good question. Do you think, I'm going to repeat it here. Do you think we should separate out time for learning and projects or keep it all in the same bucket? I would say if you can blend the two, to be honest with you, for a couple of reasons. The projects part keeps you from spinning the wheels a little bit. I think what's happening with all these developer tools in general is that we're getting a plethora of options. It's almost like having too much options. It's like going to a buffet when you know darn good well all you want is the fried chicken and maybe the mashed potatoes. But they've brought out the spare ribs. They brought out the egg rolls. They brought out everything. And you're just like, I just want the chicken and the mashed potatoes. So the idea with this is, I think with I would say starts a lot of these libraries. I've used R quite a bit, frankly, because I love the fact that there's really a dedication on examples, but there's also things for Python as well too. But I would say give those trial projects a little bit of those trial examples a little bit of a try, and even play around with the data sets. I'm a car guy at heart, so when I saw all the stuff with MT cars, I'm like, really? This is 1970s. Come on. Um, GT cars, there were a lot of times when I write articles, I would write, but I would, instead of using the MT cars from what somebody had as an example, I would see if I could do it in GT cars, because I was familiar enough with the specs to understand that, horsepower, certain ranges had to make sense. Oh, okay. Well, in this example, in GT cars, for example, they have Tesla and they have all these performance cars. So then you have an outlier in there. So my point is that the data sets should help you. That combined doing it in a project should help it should help your learning without making you feel like you are going so far into the weeds, because there are libraries and packages that are like Carrot is very extensive. It kind of has to be. It has like one of the ones has a parameter for a lot of the functions that you would see for regressions and everything else. And there's others that are super short, and you just kind of need to get a sense of what you're working with. And a project would doing it as a project can kind of put some guidelines on your time. I found that it was really hard for adults. I think it's getting a little bit harder. Not impossible, but I think it's more of a, I'm doing this library, I'm doing this syntax, but if I'm doing something with statistics, now I need to understand the statistics and then how does it work with the syntax. And some people really, it is a lot at the very beginning. Um, so I would say that, and I would say even then, you also want to learn things that are relevant to um, your data analysis. There's a couple. I'll share this real quickly. There was one time another group I tutored where I kind of disagreed with the professor. I just couldn't necessarily. I couldn't fight that power. Um, the problem was that they were learning regressions, they were learning data objects, but then they were learning systems of equations. And I didn't think and for the group that they had, most things are usually about ingesting the data and creating a statistical model, but they're not going to get too much into the math. And there are libraries for that. I was actually a little surprised by that. Um, like I said, go for what you feel, but let the data be the starting point. So I hope that answered that question, Mary. Um, oh, this is a lot though. Are you building an AI agent to manage all, all of this? I am not building an agent at this point for that. I'm actually working on another tool. And there's a lot that's out there that you can use for building tools on top of LM Studio, and I mentioned about Olama. There's a couple of IDEs. One is called Cursor. I think there's another one called Windsurf. Those are more like Visual Studio Code if you're used to that, but they're more for developers. Like even the chat window, you can select the models just like you would for large language models, but the rest of it is designed as a straight up IDE. So they're closer to maybe like what a Visual Studio Code or Positron. In fact, Cursor was built on the same framework as Visual Studio Code. So it's a little bit more. I'm not going to say don't do it, but I would say it's if you don't feel developer-ish, don't feel like you gotta wade in those waters yet. So, um, any other questions? I feel like I'm missing people. Jarrett, thank you for and Jarrett, thanks for the compliment. Yeah, I honestly think the rubric thing is here. It's here to stay. Like AI. So I think that part is coming around. Um, And like I said, and if you still feel like you're spinning wheels, don't get too discouraged. There's just a lot. And like I said, your biggest defense is data, building a project, and then kind of using that to help organize around it. You're welcome, Mary. You're welcome.
Yeah, Mary, shout out for engaging the chat. That was really you spoke like a true teacher. Like the whole presentation was very much, this is a teacher.
Thank you.
Um, it really helps when you say things like take your time, know what you're familiar with, and start there, so you don't get overwhelmed. So, yeah, thank you so much, Pierre, for the presentation. Thank you, all of you, for attending. I will redrop Pierre's LinkedIn so you can follow on his amazing adventures. But you can see, like, he showed us something that was released last month, or did you say 2 months ago?
Last
And yeah, he's on top of.
I did a presentation for a marketing analytics summit. So I was in Phoenix, Arizona, actually literally like it's a week ago. So and
Nice.
I'm trying to
Wow.
do a little bit more. I hopefully will be back for if you're interested in speaking for that for next year, come talk to me. I'll let the CFP, which is a call for presentations,
Oh,
is not
yeah.
until the fall, but they are looking for people. It's marketing oriented, but I think it's a great way of talking and interacting with. There's a lot of people from different industries. In my session for my workshop, I had people from healthcare. So there's a lot of different, it's not just, marketers talking about Google ads, Facebook ads. There's a smidge, but beyond that, there is other things out there as well. And I would love to see people do that as well too. And if you need help with presentations or ideas, just let me know because like I said, I could probably do a presentation on that sometime if you ever want me to. There's
And
a
he
lot to
means
that.
it.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot out
Thank,
there. So
thank you so much. Yeah, if you all, hey, you heard it here first. You all got the first-hand offer, so please take it. Thank you again, Pierre. We have a bunch of events coming up. There is one more today that starts in an hour. Is it? Or you could go double check me on this, but you will see me there again with Lisa. Today we have all of the people who have done it and done it well telling us how to keep doing it. So come back again. We'll see you the rest of the week, and thank you, Pierre.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. Thanks again.